Hi everybody, Jim Ostrowski. A little early today. I'm on the bike path. The weather says sunny and it's entire northeast of the United States. I'm not normally one to want the government, but this is one of those times you'd think that maybe Trump could stop raising our taxes on foreign goods and call the premier, whoever the hell the premier of Canada is, and see if they're doing anything about the wildfires. I don't know. But I just want to talk about boomer bashing. It seems to be, you can't put this fire out. So yesterday I put a post on. I said, if you're a boomer basher, turn in your IQ card. Because I just seriously believe that boomer bashing is a low IQ. It's just stupid. So apparently this thing, I didn't put out these fires with my prior 2 or 3 podcasts on this topic. So I'm going to see if I can go over it again. I don't have any notes today. I'm just going to wing it if I don't know this subject by now. So first of all, generally speaking, blaming any group, blaming individuals for something that their group did it's a pretty precarious thing to do. Obviously, only individuals are responsible for their behavior, and the fact that you might be a boomer doesn't mean you're responsible for what the other boomers did. So that's really obvious, point one. Now, there are groups in society, and it's fair to take into account of these groups. I think there are nations, and as a political scientist, I do believe that nations are real, and I analyze nations, but it's not a question of sort of scapegoating. I don't analyze nations because I'm scapegoating problems that were really caused by other groups, and I don't use it to bash individuals who happen to be part of these nations. And that's really what's going on with the boomers. The second problem, different problem, major problem, is anytime you're scapegoating, it's a huge problem, and there's a natural human tendency to scapegoat. And I like to joke, it's like the most important thing in life is to have somebody to blame when somebody goes wrong. Nobody ever wants to accept responsibility for their own flaws and their own failures. And so it's very natural for people to want to blame. As soon as something happens, we need to find the scapegoat. Well, no, we really have to resist that tendency. When something goes wrong, we have to find out what the fucking problem is and not make up a scapegoat. Because scapegoating is not only unfair to the group or individual who is scapegoated, but it means, obviously, by definition, that you're not getting to the root of the problem. So that's really the thing that bothers me the most about scapegoating boomers. You're not getting to the root of the problem. I know what the root of the problem is. I've explained it many times. I'll explain it on this podcast. So let's talk about, what is this boomer bashing? What does it really consist of? It's basically, it's very vague. Is a lot of this sort of, I think it's a left-wing phenomenon. And you could say, well, don't leftists want to scapegoat capitalism or the market? And boomers really aren't that. Well, I think it's very subtle what's going on. And I do think that boomer bashing is essentially a left-wing phenomenon. First of all, you have to understand that the left is very dishonest and manipulative. So they're not going to come right out and say what they're doing. But one of the patterns you find in leftism is going after the established order or going after basically older people and just turning everything upside down. So in that sense, I've heard it pointed out that so many of the congressmen are boomers. I never actually knew that. I'm not surprised. It takes a while. It takes a certain age to get into Congress. You have to suck up to the machine, the Democratic machine or the Republican machine for so many decades, and boomers just happen to be of the right age that they've been kissing, the ass of their political machine and their respective parties for 30, 40 years. They're now 60, 70, 80 years old, and they happen to be boomers. So it's not surprising to me. But if you're into that leftist concept of, overthrowing the existing order is populated heavily. The power elite is heavily populated by boomers. So it's not a direct attack on, the economic system, but it's sort of an indirect attack on the economic system. And also, leftists, if you watch what they do throughout history, they are scapegoaters, and they do try to whip up envy. People are envious of boomers. They allegedly have more money than they do. They had it easier. So you got to be careful you have to be careful to discern the left-wing strategies that are apparent in the anti-boomer movement. There's a lot of them. So let's move on to, what is the problem with the economy, and are boomers responsible? I mean, it's just so silly, but we have to talk about it anyway to have a complete podcast. So the American, what is the American political economy? Well, I wrote a book about it. It's called Progressivism, a Primer. For the first 100 years or so of the Republic, we had a libertarian model. It wasn't perfect libertarianism. Please don't lecture me on that. I'm talking about what was the general orientation. The general orientation was very decentralized small government, starting with the Continental Congress. They essentially had no federal government. It was just a committee of the states. The Articles of Confederation didn't change that all that much. They started a little bit of a path to centralization, but you still basically had not much of a federal government and no direct taxing power and all that stuff. But what really starts off, it didn't have an immediate effect, but the Constitution, which was ratified, I think, in 1789, that really did create the apparatus of a very strong central government. I know conservatives have yet to grasp this fact. Libertarians figured it out a long time ago. In fact, the libertarians of the time, many of them were anti-federalists, and Anti-Federalist number 1 explains all this. I'm not going to go into that now. But there was this Jeffersonian counter-revolution, 1800. He did legitimately shrink government. He did legitimately increase liberty for American citizens, generally speaking. And even though the Civil War, which is the second sort of building block of the progressive state, which the Civil War did increase the size of government both immediately and in the long-term basis. But after the Civil War, government kind of shrank a little bit, and things got back to their Jeffersonian mode all the way through World War I. But keep in mind, this is running out of park space here. This is a pretty complicated topic, I guess. But the Civil War did add one feature that was important. It's important now. Which basically said you can't secede from the Union. Well, that means that the states are the federal government's bitch, and no matter how bad things get, you can't leave unless you have a big enough army Lee tried that. He came close, but it's very difficult for the states to fight the federal government. So the Civil War laid another groundwork. And by the way, I talked about the Constitution being important to the current regime in the United States. There were no boomers around during the Constitutional Convention. There were no boomers around during the Civil War. You see how stupid all this stuff is? There's no boomers involved in any of these developments. So really, I can't go through the whole thing on a short podcast and run on a park space. But the basic regime that we suffer under now was installed around 1913 by the progressives. Woodrow Wilson got elected in 12, took office in 13. It immediately undertook to overthrow the old sort of Jeffersonian model, never perfectly installed, but roughly installed. You've got the Federal Reserve, inflation. You've got the income tax, which between the Fed and the income tax, it puts all of our incomes basically at the discretion of the government whenever the government wants to do that. We've been doing that ever since. And by the way, I don't know how good you guys are in math. The first boomer was born in 1946. There were no boomers in 1913. So everybody's got to fucking grow up and stop the fucking boomer bashing. I'm just going to go apoplectic. I'm going to have a stroke. It's just so stupid. I mean, why do we have to explain this stuff? I could be doing other stuff. I could be sleeping right now. I could be watching, TV. So, World War I, which was also a progressive adventure, really creates the sort of permanent sort of corporate state, the marriage between big business and big government, the revolving door among elites going in and out of government. And although there was a little bit of respite with Harding Coolidge, they didn't really change the basic structures of anything. So their sort of little counter-revolution kind of petered out. And next you got FDR, the Great Depression, World War II. So these are the events that shaped the progressive big government that we suffer under today. But even after World War II, by the way, there were no boomers in World War II. The people who fought World War II were our parents, our fathers. Our fathers fought the Second World War, as Billy Joel said. Mine certainly did, and many others in the boomer. I don't know why very annoying. You got to get a better selfie stick. Somebody buy me $1,000 selfie stick, will you? Because every time I get to the baseball diamond, it goes kafooey. So, I'll get it back. So, the basic political economy we live in was really set a long time before the boomers came along. But one more sort of basic building block of the progressive state was the Great Society. The massive increase in the growth of government under Lyndon Johnson, Vietnam War, Medicaid, Medicare, the federal welfare state that really, I think, turned a growing economy into a stagnant economy in the 70s. I'm a big believer that the U.S. started to decline in the 70s. That's why all of a sudden you have daycare, and 10 years before that you didn't have daycare. All of a sudden you have the breakup of the black family, and 10 years before that you didn't have the breakup of the black family. I don't think too many people pointed this out. I noticed an obesity problem in the 70s, particularly among the underclass. I didn't understand it. I made a mental note of it. I said, this is weird. What's this all about? I think the obesity crisis, the health crisis, the junk food, the fast food, pretty much all started in the 70s. Now, Lyndon Johnson was elected in 1964. I was like 6 years old. I'm peak boomer. Yeah, there were a few older boomers. I'm not sure any boomers voted for Lyndon Johnson, but if they were, it was like minimal. So let's talk about so basically by the end of the Great Society, Nixon comes in. I don't think too many boomers were even eligible to vote for Nixon. Nixon kind of solidifies progressive big government. Nixon was a progressive. He was a big government progressive on most issues, believe it or not. So really, by Nixon, Jimmy Carter, Carter really wasn't a consequential president in terms of domestic, policy. You get the Department of Education, I think, under him, but that was just a slow evolution. The bottom line is, by Lyndon Johnson, the basic progressive regime that we suffer under today, yes, it continually grows. That's what government does. But if you have this highly centralized government created by the Constitution, if the states can't leave because of the Civil War, and if the government controls the schools, which they have since 1852, I think, the first compulsory school law, if there's this mindset of progressivism that the government's going to solve all of our problems, everything since LBJ has been on autopilot. So this notion that the boomers are responsible for this stagnant, declining economy that we suffer under today, the reason why the younger generations are struggling and can't buy houses, can't start families, can't have kids, the boomers are not responsible for any of that. It's progressive big government that's responsible. Now, just a couple quick notes and they'll be done. And I hope I don't have to cover any of this again. I guess I will, because I just don't have enough audience. I'll have to keep repeating it. So if you understand that progressive big government is the problem, you can say, well, how the boomers voted. Well, I've already analyzed this in prior podcasts. The boomers' voting record is slightly to the right, somewhat center right. So although the boomers didn't, they weren't radical libertarians, they did not succeed in shrinking government. If you compare their voting record to the three younger generations, which have a lot of these boomer bashers in them, not all of them, obviously, those younger generations have voted to the left. They voted for Biden. They voted for Kamala Harris, except the third time the Gen Xers voted for Trump. So, and the Gen Z white males, I probably voted for Trump too, but Gen Z voted for Harris. So the people blaming the boomers for the stagnant economy that we are suffering under, they voted for a bigger government. If the people they had voted for won, we would have had an even bigger government. So none of it makes a lick of sense. And my response to all this is, people have to be educated as to how much the government impoverishes them. So I have a new program. I'm going to put a bumper sticker out, a marketing campaign. Government takes 80%. Government takes 80% of your income or destroys 80% of your income. I've proven that in a prior podcast. I won't talk about that now. So in addition to bashing the boomer bashers, I also have counter strategies that I'll be working on. So I'm going to grab some cup of coffee. Thanks for listening, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good day.